found out that this is part of my duties. A man had been slipping in and out of a coma for several months, but his wife stayed at him every single day. One day he finally opened his eyes and said to his wife, "You've been always with me through the bad times. When my business failed, you supported me. When I got fired, you were there. Also, when I got shot, you were by my side. When we lost our house and my health started failing, you were still by my side. So you know what it means?" "What, my darling?" says his wife, smiling bravely. "I think you're really bad luck." Boo! Well, I haven't been booed for a while, so okay. Three friends were arguing which of them had the better memory. The first man bragged, "I can remember the day of first grade." "Oh yeah?" said the second man. "Well, I can remember my first day of nursery school." "Hell, that's nothing," said the third man. "I can remember going to the dancing partner with my father and coming home with my mother." Time for one more. A man visited his friend who was banging nails into the wall. However, he threw half the nails away. "Why are you throwing them away?" he said. "The heads are on the wrong end," answered the second. "Don't be stupid. They're for the other side of the wall." Sounds like a blonde joke, doesn't it? How are we doing on the baskets? Are we all finished? Okay. Our meditation today is being led by Wes, or Les. Les is good? Okay.
On the other hand, if jokes are in, I will share one with you too. Since it's marriage joke day, man comes home for lunch and he brings a friend, and his wife looks at him and says, "What the hell did you do that for?" He says, "Look, my hair's not done, my makeup's not done, the dishes are in the sink, the kids have made a mess of the house, and I'm not even dressed yet. Why the hell now?" She looks at her and says, "Well, he's thinking about getting married." Okay, the meditation this morning, I'd like to do something a little bit different. I'd like to read a story to you. But I'd like you to also take this moment to go and to get really comfortable and relaxed. And this short story is not something you have to listen to. If you'd like to take your mind someplace else, that's fine. Or if you'd like to listen to parts of it and see just what might come to your own mind along the way. And so, for the moment, I'd like you just to take a deep, relaxing breath and to be very comfortable, and if you wish, to close your eyes or not, and to know that these few minutes are your time to use in whatever way you wish, and that this story about longing and the pain of longing is a story that I think might have some applicability to all of our lives, or not, but just to relax and take a few moments with yourself. And I'll tell you this story about the rabbit's ears. Stories about rabbits, as you know, are popular not only in the United States, but really in other parts of the world as well. The little rabbit is known as very smart, mischievous, and a happy character. He likes to make fun of other animals, whether they are large or small. And especially, he likes to make fun of the Mexican coyote. Even though he's a rogue, the rabbit is generally the hero of all of these stories. So once, 1,000 years ago, the rabbit had very small ears, rather like a cat's ears. The rabbit was happy with his ears, but not with the size of his body. He wanted to be big as a wolf, or a coyote, or even a lion. And so with his dissatisfaction with his body, one day the rabbit was hopping along through the fields and he saw a lion, the king of beasts, near the forest. "How big and beautiful he is," the rabbit said, "and I am so little and ugly." The rabbit was so sad that he sat down under a tree and he began to cry. "What's the matter, little rabbit? Why are you crying?" asked the owl who lived in the tree. "I'm crying because I want to be big, very big," said the little rabbit. The owl was a wise bird, as you know. He closed his eyes for 2 or 3 minutes in order to think about the problem. And then he said, "Little rabbit, you should pay a visit to the god of the animals. I think he can make you bigger." "Many thanks, wise owl. I'll visit him right now," the rabbit answered. And he went hopping along toward the hill where the god lived. "Good morning, how are you?" the god of the animals said when he saw the little rabbit. "Good morning, sir. I am sad because I am so small. Your Majesty, could you make me big? Very big." "Well, why do you want to be big?" the god answered, smiling. "Well, if I am big, someday I can be the king of the animals instead of the lion." "Very well," said the king of the god. "But first you have to do 3 difficult tasks. Then I'll decide whether I should make you bigger or not." "Well, what do I have to do?" "Well, tomorrow you have to bring me the skins of a crocodile, a monkey, and a snake." "Very well, sir. I'll see you tomorrow." The rabbit was happy. He hopped along towards the river and he saw his friend, the small crocodile. "Friend Crocodile, could you lend me your elegant skin until tomorrow? I need it for a party, huh?" the crocodile said before the rabbit could tell him the truth. Yes, the rabbit answered quickly. "Oh, what a great honor for me. Here it is." With the crocodile skin, the rabbit visited the monkey and the snake, and each of his friends gave him their skins. Well, very early the following morning, the rabbit went very slowly, because of the heavy skins, to the god of the animals. "Here I am with the skins," the little rabbit shouted happily. Well, the god was surprised. He thought, what a clever little rabbit this is. But he said aloud, "If I make you bigger, then you might inadvertently hurt one of the other animals without wanting to. And for that reason, I am going to make your ears bigger. That way, you will be able to hear any other animals when they might be coming to you, and especially your enemies." So the god touched the little rabbit's small ears, and as if by magic, they became bigger. The rabbit didn't have time to say a thing, not even a word. "Thank you very much, good god of the animals. You are very wise and kind. Now I am very happy," the rabbit said. And he went hopping along through the fields with the skins which he gratefully returned to his friends. And the following day he saw the lion was visiting the owl. And the owl told the rabbit, "Good morning, my friend. You look very handsome. And for you, it's better to have big ears than a big body." So with great dignity, the lion said, "The owl is right." And from that day on, the rabbit lived very happily with his small body and his big ears. And so I wonder how that might touch any or all of us in some way as we think about our own longings and the specificity of our desires and the simple pleasure that we can take in the things that have been added to each of our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Les. Our presenter today is Erik Phariss, understanding the body's 7 systems and how they are affected by 7 specific forms of stress, discovering the 5 causes of all diseases, polarity balancing, a hands-on approach to reducing stress on the body, your body's electrical system, and why polarity balancing works. This presentation provides the tools to balance the polarity of your own body and others, identify root causes of diseases, take steps to reduce stress in your own life. Erik was born and raised in Santa Cruz, California, has been researching alternative health treatments and therapies since 1999. Please welcome Erik.
Good morning. I first want to thank Jim and everybody else who made this possible today. I really appreciate the invitation, and it's a great honor to be able to present anything for people who I would consider to be not my peers, but actually many of you are my own mentors. So thank you so much for the honor to be able to speak to you guys today. What I have to speak about is going to be broken up into three sections. The first is really the 5 causes of all diseases. The second part of that is the 7 forms of stress that affect the 7 systems of your body. And then the third part of that is the polarity balancing. So I'm sure that some of you may have questions, and if you're taking notes and you don't catch everything, ask me afterward, and I'll just email you a copy of my notes. Since I vastly underestimated the amount of people here and don't have as many as I thought I would. So what I want to start out talking about is the very first cause of all diseases, and that's what we think. What we think makes a difference in many different ways. Essentially, all your intellectual thoughts and processes travel through the limbic system in the brain and immediately cause a difference in body functions. Basically, the connection between the limbic system and emotional memory, including positive thoughts, love, joy, peace, and negative thoughts, anger, guilt, lust, bitterness, greed, envy. It's been very, very interesting because a lot of the recent studies about this have gone on to show that people who have a positive outlook on life, or people who begin life from a perspective where they believe that they are not only wanted and that they are here for a reason, they actually end up in much better health in their later years. So I think it's incredibly significant that what we believe about ourselves and what we believe about others, including God, makes a difference in your own health. And that's the first cause of all diseases. That is what you think. The second one, and we're going to go through these as quickly as we can, that way we will not run out of time. The second one is what we say. Now, what we say, which is what we say about ourselves and what we say about others, as well as what we say about God, it all makes a difference because what we believe and what we think very quickly becomes, in the most practical sense, part of our actions as soon as we say it. So we're told death and life are in the power of the tongue, but positive words produce energy for health and peace. Negative words result in confusion and disease. The difference between these two, basically positive words could be things like praise, verbal blessings, audible prayers, cries to God. Negative words expressing things like curses, ridicule, mocking, gossip, and false accusations. Those would be the best collection of negative things I can think at this time. The next is what we do, and this is the law of cause and effect. So essentially, the first two are things that not everybody can always see. The third one is really something that everybody knows. It's apparent to everyone else what you're doing. But sometimes it's not apparent to ourselves. A good example of this would be in what you do. This is the law of the harvest. What you sow, you will reap. And the next part of that a lot of people forget is not only what you sow will you reap, but where you sow is where you will reap. So if you decide that instead of studying, it would be a good idea to spend a lot of time going to parties and staying up late, you will reap that eventually, and maybe a little bit sooner than you think. And the next part of that is you always reap more than what you sowed. That means you put a little bit of time in now to do something, and it makes a big difference later, for better or for worse. So what we do, the 4 laws of the harvest, we reap what we sow, we reap where we sow, we reap more than we sow, and then the final one, which is we reap in a different season than we sow. And that's delayed gratification. What that means is people who spend time and invest it early in life reap more later in life, and the earlier you invest that, doing positive things, the more you will reap later. And I realize for a lot of you, you're probably thinking, well, now you tell me, but all of these things, they're actually pretty obvious. And although I'm saying them, most of you already know this. And then the fourth one, which this one I think has been focused on quite a bit, and this is the fourth cause of all these, this is what we eat. People say you are what you eat, and it's not entirely true. You are what you do with what you eat. So that ties right into the next part of this, which is the fifth cause is what we inherit. Going back to what we eat, there's been a lot of emphasis. There's been a lot of emphasis put on having proper nutrition and a balanced diet, and all of these things that can lead up if we're eating organic food or not eating pesticides and a lot of these. I think these are excellent things. Certainly nobody wants to eat poison. However, I believe what you do with what you eat is actually more important than what you eat, because the first three will have a greater difference on how you digest and absorb nutrients. So if you're eating nutritious food but you're not absorbing it, you're really not getting the benefit of what you're eating regardless. So what you eat is actually less important than what people believe. And then the fourth one is what we inherit. Now this is genetic as well as in a spiritual sense. If you have a father or a grandfather who's an alcoholic, and your father's an alcoholic, and you just drink a lot, it's not a coincidence. There are a lot of people who say, I'm not really an alcoholic, I can quit anytime I want, I've done it hundreds of times. So the reality of this is that you do inherit genetic tendencies towards certain diseases, and they will make you weak towards certain things. Now if you go out and you look for those things and you say, you know what, I think it's just genetic, my grandfather was a diabetic and my mother was, and I am also, and that's just the way it is. They found out a lot of interesting things about genetics, and a lot of things that we had believed were, in fact, genetic diseases. When they started doing studies with families that had adopted children from China, and so you have a mother and father, or one of them is diabetic, or possibly both of them, and they adopt somebody who's less than 9 months old, well, within 16 years, their children are also diabetic. And it would be hard to say if there's any real genetic similarity between them. It can be sometimes environmental. A lot of times it's you're eating the same things your parents ate, and you're in the same environment, and you end up with the same diseases. So what we inherit, as well as environmental impact, that is the fifth cause of all diseases. So going over them real quick: what we think, what we say, what we do, what we eat, and what we inherit. And the next part of this is specifically related to a couple of these. Now, I realize what I'm going to say is not really all that surprising, although I do want to preface this and say none of this is really my own research. I know lots of people who have spent a great deal of time, and several people in their entire lifetime researching this. I've had the benefit of that in the form of reading their books, and I've compiled some of that in my notes here, but this is really nothing that I went out myself and did, so I want to give credit where credit is due. The first part of this is the cardiovascular system. There's one specific form of stress which affects the cardiovascular system. Does anybody have any idea what that could be? Anyone?
Fear. Anger?
Correct, anger. Anger affects the cardiovascular system. Have you ever noticed that somebody gets really, really angry, their face turns red? That's not really a coincidence. Basically, the cardiovascular system is comprised of the heart, lymphatic ducts, and blood vessels, including arteries, veins, and capillaries. And when you become angry, it releases hormones in your body which cause you to actually restrict the capillaries, and you concentrate blood flow to the vital organs, and you start to lose feeling in your extremities. And this is actually part of a reaction that happens when you get adrenaline. And the design for this is to give you that ability to fight or to run. Now, if this happens on a regular basis and you're angry all the time, after a while, that stress caused on the blood vessels starts to begin a process which eventually leads to heart problems. Essentially, and this was a very recent Harvard Medical School study that said that essentially getting angry on a regular basis doubled the risk of heart attack. That's not my study. Like I say, all of this information is very easy to prove, although I'm not going to spend your time trying to prove it right now, but if you would like to know the studies and everything, I'd be happy to point you to the books and everything which I use for these references. So when we talk about anger, most people would say that they're not angry people. If they say that, you should probably ask a relative or their wife. And find out, is he an angry person? You may find a very different answer. And people say, well, I only get angry every once in a while. I say, okay, well, that's interesting. And say, how would you like to live next to a volcano that only goes off every once in a while? You don't really know when it's going to go off, and it may happen a couple times a month, or may never happen in your lifetime, but it's only every once in a while. So that is anger. The second form of stress which directly affects our body, and the system in the body, is the nervous system. And that is guilt. Now, I'm sure several of you were probably raised Catholic, and you think, wow, he's just going through, 7 deadly sins here. Almost. Very, very similar. So there was more truth to that than you may have been willing to believe at the time. But guilt presupposes something which is very interesting. It presupposes an unchangeable and universal standard of right and wrong. What that means is that you cannot feel guilty about something if there are no laws and you do not believe there are no laws. What happens is people can feel guilty about things that they may or may not have done. But I say that's not often the case. Most people feel guilty because we do enough things we probably should feel guilty for. And the important part of guilt is basically understanding how it affects the nervous system. This is really simple and basically in a polygraph test. This is actually considered scientific, and polygraph tests in most countries now, depending on the machine used, are considered submittable evidence in some types of cases for guilt. Essentially, what they found out when studying body languages, they went all over the world and they found all these people who really hadn't had very much exposure to Western culture or anything, and they started sticking machines on them, and they would find out and say, okay, well, go ahead and tell a lie. And they would tell a lie, and they would measure a difference in their body. And I said, well, these are people who, we didn't say were, really influenced by our Western culture, so some sort of innate thing in them tells them that when they tell a lie, that something's wrong. So people will actually itch their nose, and they'll do a lot of other things. They'll lose feeling in their fingertips. And people who study body language will tell you, if you look at a young child, you can ask them and say, did you kick the dog? And they'll go, no. It's not until we're a little bit older that we learn we have to keep our hands down when telling lies, because it makes it a little bit easier to be believed. So guilt affects the nervous system. And a couple ways to uncover guilt. And people say, well, I'm not really a guilty person. I said, prison is full of people who are not guilty. So the ways that we can look at that is, this is blaming others, judging other people, punishing the messenger as well as rejecting the message, being too harsh or being too lenient, lying, denying and justifying, and covering up our actions. So I'm not here to point fingers at any of you. As I was going through all my notes last night and everything, I was thinking, oh God, what have I done? And I believe that every single person has to look at this from their own perspective, and what I hope to do is just give you an idea of what is affected, and you can run with that and see. Hopefully you're not going to use this to diagnose other people and figure out what's wrong with your spouse or everyone else. It's much more effective on yourself, but The third form of stress which directly affects the body systems is lust, and that is the endocrine system. Now, this is a very, very interesting form of stress because most people wouldn't admit to this, or some people would, but very few. I'm not going to go out there and say, you know what, you're just a bunch of angry, guilty, lustful people. It might be true, but basically the endocrine system is comprised of 16 glands and organs in the body, including the kidneys. And essentially, what happens when you lust, and when we think of lust in the most basic way, we're thinking, oh, I see that person. That is a form of lust. It's a little bit different than greed, and we'll talk about greed later. But basically, lust and anger come together. They're both twins, and this is something that's very, very interesting about this, is that it's the lateral nucleus of the central nervous system. If it's lightly stimulated, it gives you a sense of fulfillment and well-being. If it's overstimulated, it produces rage. That's very, very interesting. So it's the same switch, but different amounts of pressure produce different results. So a lot of people, they will actually be very angry because they're overstimulating the lateral portion of the central nervous system. So there's different types of lust, if you understand what I'm saying. A good example of that would be overeating. Silence falls in the crowd. You see, you may not have thought that you were a lustful person. Neither did I until last night when I was preparing this. And what we think about others as the lust of the mind, that is also another form of lust. And basically, it ultimately is controlled by a change in the belief system in your heart. What you think about other people will determine how you look at other people, and that will ultimately determine your health in the endocrine system. So that's the first three. We only have 4 more, so don't worry. The next is bitterness. Now, a lot of people would say they're not bitter people. I've actually had people look at me straight in the face and say, I am not bitter. But, okay. The husband's over next to me going, yes, yes. So, the digestive system is affected by bitterness. And what we're looking at is basically the most important part of digestion. This is very, very overlooked. Digestion actually begins in your mind. It begins when you believe that you're going to eat something and you know what that is, and your body starts to prepare things and secretions in your bowels to be able to absorb and prepare for what you're going to eat. This is why it's so disturbing when you order something and they bring you something else. This is something we're not prepared to eat. So beginning in the mind, and you can understand that's the way digestion works, bitterness affects your mind and it affects your body and specifically the digestive system in such a way that people who are very bitter will begin to secrete enough hormones and enough things that the gallbladder will actually start to get a little bit slack. And it doesn't contain everything the way it's supposed to and doesn't react the same way, and it slows your digestion process. And because of this, people will actually start to develop gallstones. And because of that, gallstones, or actually gallbladder surgery, is the most common digestive tract surgery in the world. It's the #1 leading surgery for anything in the digestive tract. So I think that there's probably a lot of bitter people out there, whether they're willing to admit it or not. So another interesting thing, there's over 100 million neurotransmitters that line the length of the digestive tract. That's approximately the same amount as what you find in your brain. So we talk about people that say, I have this gut feeling about it. Well, actually, your gut is capable of just as much neurotransmitting as your brain is. This is why there's so many other unexpected reactions when people have surgeries and have portions of their intestines removed. Basically, bitterness produces a stress which upsets hormonal balance and produces more cortisol. And essentially what that does is that overstimulates the thyroid production and stimulates appetite. What that means to you is you eat more than you're supposed to eat because you're bitter, which is yet another cause of obesity. So, yet another one. Greed, the immune system. Now, there's a lot of things that are talked about in the immune system, and people will talk about taking things to improve the immune system, and to, there's really all these immune boosters and everything. But basically, greed causes chronic inflammation, and most of the inflammatory diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, eczema, inflammatory bowel disease, and everything can be traced back to chronic inflammation. And I'm not saying, if you understand what I'm saying, I'm not saying 100% of everybody with arthritis is a greedy person. But what I am saying, and this is kind of like the adage about tattoos, they said not all people who have tattoos are criminals, but all criminals have tattoos. But I say that because there are so many people out there that are greedy, this does make a difference, and most of the things that they weren't expecting, things that come up when you're 25 years old, when you're 27 or 35 years old, can be traced back to greed. So actually, this also goes back to obesity, depression, cancer, a lot of other things that are related to this amount of inflammation which happens in your body when you're greedy. So I thought about this and I said, well, that's interesting, if you were a greedy person, whoever those people are. And basically, the ways that we look at and we can see greed, the first one will be damaging relationships for money. That's where you say, you know what, they're just not that valuable. I think I'm going to take their money and run. The other one would be any form of gambling. Once again, silence over the crowd. Frequently talking about money, or the inability to enjoy possessions. That is, the inability to enjoy what you already have and have been given. Because there's something which you don't have, which you haven't been given, which looks so much better. And then going into debt for wants or get-rich-quick schemes. I do call those schemes. There's very few shortcuts to wealth, and all of them involve doing things which will either damage others or end you in jail. So that is the immune system and greed. So the fifth, and this was mentioned earlier, this is fear. Fear directly affects the respiratory system. And in fact, most causes of what's considered to be, basically distill this down, asthma you're not born with. This is where all of a sudden you have asthma when you're 8 or 9 years old. It actually can be traced back to a fear of abandonment. It can come from, if you look at orphanages and things, you'll find there's actually a higher occurrence of asthma occurring in people who do not have parents than those that do. This can also happen, like, say, every once in a while, your parents forgot you at the supermarket. If that happened very often, you would probably begin, depending on your reaction to that, begin to have problems with the respiratory system, usually ending in asthma. And essentially, asthma attacks are brought on by fear. And there's different types of fear, but essentially, fear being a trigger for asthma has actually been a very recent development. And there's a lot of people who look at that, and you see people with inhalers and things, and people with inhalers and EpiPens together. And if they get stung by a bee or something like that, the first thing they need is they need the inhaler because they just panicked. And then they need epinephrine so that they don't swell up like an elephant and die. The thing is, because you have those, you never really know what your reaction would be if you didn't. And most people will begin to notice a difference when they actually resolve these fears. And that's the thing that really is the polar opposite of love, is fear. People thought love and hate were different, but I would say that the opposite of love is fear, because fear drives us to make wrong decisions, and every single time you can look back and you can see a lot of decisions you've made which were based on fear probably were not good decisions. The fear also causes your body to secrete different hormones than it should at the time. A good example of that, if somebody is very neurotic and very nervous, and they jump every single time they see a shadow, their hypothalamus is probably overactive, and that's the visual link between your eyes and your adrenals. So that means when you see a bus about to run you over, your hypothalamus says, give you adrenaline so you can run away. The problem is, if you see something which you thought might be a bus, but it turns out just to be a donkey, or a shadow, or something like that, you get adrenaline anyways. And by taxing the adrenal glands, you'll cause other problems, and eventually that does affect the immune system. So there we are. There is 5 of 7. I seem to have left something out here. And the next one, this is something that most people, I would say that, coming from my perspective, very few people are going to come right out and say, this is what my problem is. But I found this in my own life. This was my number one problem. That's envy. And envy affects the musculoskeletal system. And the ways we reveal envy, just a real simple list here. Comparing ourselves with others. Excessive window shopping. That means including eBay. Imagining life as someone else. Putting others down or wanting things that others have. Envy is essentially the most difficult, and not only is it the most difficult to see, but it's the most difficult of these types of stress to really conquer. And essentially, envy is setting your affection on what someone else has and focusing on what it takes to claim that for ourselves. So, if you're always looking outside and seeing all the things everybody else has, and your entire life mission and goal is directed towards acquiring those things, you're probably an envious person. And the stress of envy raises cortisol levels. Once again, we go back to cortisol. We just talked about how that would cause obesity and a lot of other things. And it makes calcium supplementation ineffective in treating osteoporosis. Actually, a very prominent physician that said that, and he wasn't speaking directly about envy, but he said that with rising cortisol levels, there was no amount of supplementation or drugs which he could give which would be enough to overcome high levels of cortisol. What that means is that if you're a very envious person, you will begin to start the process which will deteriorate your own bones and actually cause them to become more porous, or almost as if they were rotting. Actually, the Bible tells us envy is rottenness to the bones. So when you look at things from that perspective and you say, wow, look at all of the things I could be doing to myself. It's a good thing I don't do any of those. So obviously the first step to conquer any of these is to acknowledge you have the problem. Now, we've worked backwards. We've looked at this and said, okay, these are the symptoms that you may experience because of these problems. Now, if you're experiencing those symptoms, there's a good chance you have one of those problems. So there's one way to conquer envy, and that's with sincere gratefulness. And that's, you identify the subject of envy, choose to make others successful, you diet your own wants and desires, putting others first, you learn the skill of praising others. What that means is that if you can sincerely praise somebody, it's very, very hard for you to be envious of them. And that's something that a lot of people, we say, oh, you did such a great job, and the whole time you're thinking, oh, I wish that was me. I said, that is not sincere praise. So the other part of that is to realize what people really admire. Most envy is driven by this desire to be something, to be important to someone. I'm trying to find a copy of my notes, which has not been blurred out there. There we are. It says, people really admire love, compassion, kindness, gratefulness, loyalty. Those are the qualities which they admire. They don't necessarily admire wealth, skills, or abilities, or talents, or any of those things. And if you're constantly in pursuit of those things because you want to be admired, then you're going to be very, very much disappointed. Because those are not the things which people admire. That's actually the things that people envy. So if you're wanting to be the envy of everyone, then you're probably on the right track. So most of the information which I've talked about so far has actually come out of the book, which I'm not selling or anything, but I wanted to let you know, just in case you wanted to know. It's called How to Resolve 7 Deadly Stresses, and I have the ISBN up here if anybody's interested. The book was written by a group of doctors who have been working in medicine for a long time, and they kind of all got together. This was controversial enough. They figured if enough of us write this, then nobody's going to say anything. If one guy writes it, they'll probably crucify him. So enough of them got together, and there's about 5 or 6 physicians, and they said, this is what we're going to write, and the book actually includes stories of these things and practical examples of people who were beyond help, people that had actually literally done everything possible, and they had problems that nobody knew how to solve. And then when they resolved these problems and these bitternesses and greed and envy and these other things, their problems went away. Now, what I want to share is a story that I know about myself. This was a young man that I had the opportunity to meet, and he was having a lot of problems. He was 17 years old, and he had been told that he had cancer in his spleen. His spleen was about that big, is what they said. So that's not a scientific measurement, that big, but that's what he said, about that big. And he was 17 years old. So I started talking to him because I was speaking with him and his mother, and we were meeting at a friend's house, and I said, this is really interesting because you're talking about something which is unusual because you weren't born with this cancer, but you developed it in the course of 6 months, is what they were saying. It just grew out of almost nowhere. And I said, this is fascinating. I said, was there any one thing that you can look back at and say, was there any traumatic experience or anybody you might be angry at or anything like that, which is directly preceding this? When you started to notice this discomfort, and eventually they went to the hospital and they took an MRI and among other things found that his spleen was 3 times his normal size. And he said, yeah, I think there's probably something. And he didn't say much about it at the time, and then I learned later speaking to his mother. And I told him at the time, I just said, if there is anything, you need to go and you need to go back and make this right if it's something you've done wrong, or forgive someone if somebody's wronged you. Because I believe this is really the root cause of what you're experiencing. And he took me very seriously. He said, okay, I think I'm going to try to do that. When I spoke to his mother to find out, and she wanted to tell me what this was, is he had been kidnapped by a neighbor of theirs and tied to a chair and had a gun put to his head. And this neighbor said that he was going to kill him. Before he was able to do that or anything else to him, the boy's own father came and rescued him. Now, this neighbor was an adult child of their neighbors they'd known for a long time, who the entire neighborhood and the police considered to be insane. So they didn't do anything to prosecute him for this. They just took the boy away and said, watch out for him, he's crazy. So the boy, every single morning, he would wake up and he would see his neighbor. And he would get mad and bitter and angry, and he was angry, first of all, at his parents because they couldn't do anything to prosecute him for this. He was angry at God because somehow God had let this happen to him. He was angry at I say this neighbor. He was about 35 years old or so. He was really angry at this boy who may or may not have even been in possession of all of his mental faculties. And every single time he saw him, he would be, it was just rage. He would be so mad at him. And this happened for about 2 weeks before he started feeling something a little bit strange. Now I want to finish this story because I think it's important. This happened, and next week I saw him, and he came, and his face was totally different, and he was very excited. And at this point, he'd only done 1 round of chemotherapy, and they had told him basically, well, you can't go out into the sun because that's not going to be good for you, so stay in your room. So he wasn't really excited about that either, but when he came, he looked totally different. And he said, well, I have something interesting to tell you. I said, really, what's that? He says, well, I forgave that person. He says, we also just came from the hospital, and they said my spleen's back to normal size, and I don't have cancer anymore. I thought, that's fascinating. I thought, well, what can you attribute to this? Why do you think that this happened? He says, well, I gave him a book about forgiveness. He says, I read that book. He says, and I forgave this guy. He says, and that's the only thing I did different. And that's why I say the power of forgiveness is that not only does it set you free, that's really what most people see, but it also sets the other person free. But the way to look at this, the parable, if you will, is a story of a king who has a servant, and this servant owes him quite a bit of money. And so he calls him before him and says, pay me what you owe. And the servant says, hey, I don't have the money. There's just no way. And he owed more than he could possibly hope to pay. It was more than a year's wages. And he said, I can't pay you right now, but maybe you give me some time? The king said, no, I think we're just going to sell you off, and that's the way you'll pay your debt. And he begged with him and said, no, please. He got down on his knees and says, please just give me some more time. And the king said, you know what? I know you can't pay me, so I'm going to forgive you. And you're forgiven, and the debt is considered the debt paid. And the same servant goes out, and he finds one of his fellow servants who owed him roughly the equivalent of about $5. And he takes him by the throat, and he grabs and says, pay me what you owe me. And he says, hey, I can't do it. I don't have the money. I can't do it right now. And he says, you know what? You're going to pay either way. He said, you're going to pay either way. So he takes him and he throws him in prison, in debtor's prison, so that he would pay him this debt. Now, most of you kind of get the idea that when you go into prison, you're not actually making any money. So you're not going to be able to pay this debt. So, which that's an important part of the story, because some other servants saw this, and they went and they told this king, and they said, hey, you know what? This guy that you forgave all this money, he went out and he threw this other guy in prison, he did this. They told him what happened. And he called this other servant before him. He says, didn't I forgive you? Didn't I forgive you all of this? And you couldn't forgive him, these $5? And he said that you will take him and throw him in prison until the debt is paid. Now, a lot of people will see that and say, oh, okay, well, he just decided, he wasn't going to forgive the guy the debt anymore, and he's going to throw him in jail, too. But that's not the way forgiveness works. The debt, what was the debt that he was speaking of? It wasn't the debt which the servant owed the king. It was the debt which the other servant owed that servant. So he would be in prison himself until the debt which he was owed was paid. What does that mean? That means that this king, in a very creative and in a way that I believe that only God can really do, he took this servant and put him in prison with the guy who owes him money. And as soon as this guy who owes him money pays him, then he'll be free also. Now, some of you may see the problem with this. What that means is that until he is ready to forgive this other debt, he will never be free. And that's the power of forgiveness, is that it not only releases other people, but it sets ourselves free. And I've spoken to many people who are bitter and envious, and they have a lot of problems, but the root cause of a lot of things is bitterness. And they're bitter at people who are no longer even alive. They died 20 years ago. People who never knew that they had ever wronged them. And then you have to ask yourself, in that sense, who was really the one in prison? Who was the one who wasn't free? It was them themselves. So what I wanted to take a look at here in the next about 5 minutes or so is about the body. We're going back to the nervous system, because a lot of you came to hear about what polarity balancing is. And essentially your nervous system uses electricity to send signals, and anytime you have electric current, you have a magnetic field, and your own body has its own magnetic field. So all polarity balancing is think of it kind of like jumper cables. Now the reason I wanted to show people this is because the best way I know to do it requires one person and 6 volunteers to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have somebody help me here, but they will be the person we're going to do this on. But I actually need 6 other people who are willing to do this, and all you will have to do is rub your hands together. So if you are wanting to participate in this, please come towards the stage. And if nobody comes, I might nominate some people, so come quickly. Okay, we also need, gentleman I spoke to, oh, here he is, our victim. Don't worry, you won't be getting a massage. I borrowed this, so we better not break it. Okay. You can just lay face up on the table, any part of it. And I'll explain very briefly the way this works because I know our time is short. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to rub our hands together briskly, about like this. This is about 30 seconds. So you'll find that there's different positions to rub your hands in. This one, like down like this, or like this, depending on how long you're doing this for, it can be more comfortable. Now, do any of you have any experience with this at all? Okay. So this is pretty straightforward. All we're going to do is what's considered a simple polarity circle. Essentially what this is your body, and I'm not going to be participating, so I won't rub my hands, but keep rubbing your hands. Your body is different in polarity from each side. Essentially your right hand is positively charged and your left hand is negatively charged. Your feet are negatively charged and your head is positively charged. That's why we have an earth ground, because the earth is a negative charge. And what we're going to be doing is balancing the polarity of the body, assuming it's not in balance. If it's totally balanced, this will probably do almost nothing. I have met very few people who are totally balanced. So what we're going to do is, probably about maybe 10 more seconds, briskly rub your hands together. There are several positions where I'm going to have you put your hands by your side. And there are several positions where you will be making contact with them. Right now I'm just going to put you on one at a time. I'm going to have you come and just place your hands, your right hand on this right ear and your left hand on the left ear. Now, while we're doing this, I also want to mention this is nothing that I have discovered. Now I'm going to have you come here and place your left hand on his forehead and your right hand on this part of his abdomen. And you can actually touch it. If contact is better. What I'll have you do, ma'am, is your left hand on his right shoulder and your right hand on his left hip, which is right there below that. Just like that. And you will actually be right over here with your left hand on his palm, touching his palm, like that on that hand, and then reaching across to touch this foot. Now, as he has his shoes on, this is for demonstration purposes. This would be more effective if you didn't have your shoes on. But we're trying to get you an idea. So this is 1/2 of a circle, because now, if you're wanting to see what this looks like, take a good look, because we're about to put people on the other half, and you may not be able to see. So if you want to take the other position, which is left hand to right foot, right hand to palm, and as much as possible, I try to avoid touching each other's arms and hands while you're doing this. And if you want to take this hand and go to that hip, and then to this shoulder. Now, we've run out of places, but we do have a use for you. Because she's getting tired of kneeling, so anytime you'd like to switch out, you're welcome. But what I'm going to ask you guys is this is essentially, this rubbing of the hands is an activation of the magnetic field of the human body. And what you can feel sometimes, you've been rubbing them for a while, if you just take your fingertips up, you face the audience a little bit more. run your fingertips through the field of the other hand. So it's not heat, and you don't have to touch it, and just see if you can feel any difference when you move them or not. Depending on how briskly you rub your hands and how sensitive you are to that, you may or may not feel that. But I'd say that this position we're doing right now can be done by anybody. Most of you have limited or no experience in doing this. Now there's a great problem with this, and I think a lot of you already see the problem. You need to have at least 6 friends. So if you get together with enough friends, this is really easy to do. You could do each of these positions separately. You yourself could go and do this. It just takes a lot longer. So what I'm going to do is I'll actually have you guys stand up. We've only done this for about 5 minutes, but we are running out of time. What we're going to ask is, did any of you guys that were doing this, did you necessarily feel anything strange or weird or anything while you were doing that? Okay. You said warmth in the hands? Okay. Then you were rubbing them together. Do you think it was because you were rubbing your hands together? Okay. So you weren't rubbing your hands together when you were doing it there, so you felt warmth. Now, our victim, provided he's still alive. Oh, there he is. Now, did you feel anything different in this?
Well, I felt very relaxed.
Okay, he said it felt very relaxed. So, would you say that this felt like it was in any way harmful to you?
No.
Okay, not harmful to you. Okay, so the idea behind this is a way that you can balance the polarity in the human body, in every cell, but it's not necessarily the only way to do it. There's many ways to do this, but this is a free way, first of all, provided you don't have to pay the people who are standing around you. And it's also a way that's accessible to a lot of people. Now, the things that seem to make a difference in this, I found that the better grounded, I don't mean mentally, I mean physically, if the people who are doing this are on a surface that's, whether it's outdoors or maybe not carpet, they have their shoes off, it seems to work a lot better. Also, if the people who are doing this have the table at a height, we have this here so you can see, where they don't have to bend over, they're going to be willing to do it a lot longer. So there's a couple of things that make a difference in this. But essentially, this is a practice which has been around for a long time, and actually has been used by many people. But it's not something that I would say that there's really a whole lot of real comprehensive information about, except for a couple books, and you can find those books actually even on Amazon, and if you want to know the names of them, I'm more than willing to tell you. But the idea behind this is, if you're doing this properly, you will balance the polarity in every cell in the body, and you can cause the nervous system to actually relax. Now, as we talked about before, if there's a root cause for nervous system problem, this at best will be a quick fix. But a lot of people have fixed problems, right? And they've gone to stresses and things, and they've overcome these problems, but the body hasn't quite caught up yet. And that's what I believe polarity balancing is valuable for. So, like I said, there's no magic to this or anything, and everybody can try this at home. And the only reason I've ever attempted it is because I was told it would work whether I believed in it or not. I didn't believe in it, so I figured I'll give it a shot, and we'll see what happens. So it's been around for a long time. Now, you yourself, you mentioned, about how long ago was that you had studied this?
30 years.
I said 30 years. So this predates myself by quite a bit. So I can take no credit for discovering nor progressing this science in any way. But I want to thank everybody who volunteered to come up here and do this. And now you want to make a comment about it?
I learned this technique excellent in Big Sur.
Oh, okay.
And when I use it when I give a massage. There's a lot of energy that you're moving in the body. So at the end of the massage, I always do a polarity run.
If you're going to be talking, you're going to have to use the mic because people can't hear you.
Thank you.
I was going to say that I learned the technique at Esalen Institute in Big Sur 30, 40 years ago. And I'm a massage therapist. When I give a massage,
on moving a lot of energy in the body because we are electrical systems. At the end of the massage, I do a polarity run that I call. And it's been really effective. People like it. They feel relaxed when they finish, and it's worked. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you. If anybody needs to leave, if you could please just leave quietly. You can't hear me? Oh, sorry. If anybody needs to leave now, if you could do so quietly, I'm sure Eric would be available to answer questions if you have. Now, shall I read the next presenter, or just?
Yeah, go ahead and do that, and then we'll continue.
Eric will be around so can answer questions. Our next presenter for next week is Valerie Siegel. Be the change you want to see in the world, the power of positive protest. There are some basic principles that apply to protesting. Let's talk about how to get what? Name it. Let's examine the how and why of protesting, the role of resistance, and the power of focusing on what it is we want to accomplish. When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. Valerie Siegel has studied neuro-linguistic programming, hypnosis, results coaching, pastoral counseling, law, and meditation. She has served as a hospice chaplain, pastoral counselor, and life coach. Valerie also served as a homicide and narcotics prosecutor in suburban Washington, D.C., a mediator in Maryland court system, and an elder law attorney. My goodness. While an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland, she wrote courses for University College. She also wrote the first drug policy for the state of Maryland, and she has been published frequently in the Maryland Bar Journal. Pretty impressive. Please remember to turn your cell phones back on, and please pick up coffee cups and stack the chairs, and thank you for coming, and Eric will be available if you have any questions. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.